Senator Cruz, you have been a stalwart supporter of the Jewish state of Israel. And every day, unfortunately, from the Biden administration, we're seeing them reversing the policies that the Trump administration put in place, including recently talk of opening a U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. Tell us your thoughts about that.
Listen, it is heartbreaking. Unfortunately, under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, this administration's support of Israel has weakened dramatically. You know, it used to be, a decade ago, one of the great strengths of the America-Israel friendship and alliance was that it was bipartisan. It cut across party lines. That's important. That's something we need to preserve. And I got to tell you, that bipartisan support has been frayed, and it's been frayed badly. And I was there when that damage began to be done, and it was the beginning of Barack Obama's second term. The beginning of his second term was when he was negotiating the Iran nuclear deal, a catastrophic deal. And the Obama White House told Senate Democrats, you need to choose between Israel and the Democratic Party. And tragically, a lot of Democrats who had for years stood with Israel, chose party loyalty instead of Israel. And that horrific deal sent over $100 billion to the Ayatollah Khamenei, even as he chanced death to America and death to Israel. We saw President Trump elected. I worked hand in hand very closely with President Trump. And to reverse the weakness, the lessened support for Israel, and just think about it, a year ago, we had peace flowering in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords. I was at the White House for the signing of the Abraham Accords. And the first peace deal in the Middle East in decades. And I'll tell you, Ellie, the reason they came about. They came about because of U.S. clarity and lack of ambiguity. You know, for a long time, Democrats and Republicans, when it comes to Israel, had deliberately embraced strategic ambiguity, blurring the lines. And what I urged President Trump to do is I said, listen, if you want peace, let's be absolutely clear. I think there were two decisions that led to the Abraham Accords. Number one, America opening our embassy in Jerusalem. And I was there the day we opened the embassy, the 70th anniversary of the creation of the modern state of Israel. It was an incredible time. People dancing in the streets in Jerusalem. Secondly, was America pulling out of that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Both of those said unequivocally, we stand with Israel. And I got to tell you, when the Abraham Accords were signed, I talked with the foreign minister and ambassadors of the UAE and Bahrain. Both said to me almost word for word the exact same thing. They said, we now see that America stands unequivocally with Israel. We want to be friends with America, so we'll be friends with Israel. That clarity produces peace, and the heartbreaking thing is under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they're immediately trying to go back to the ambiguity, to blurring the lines. Within the opening weeks of the presidency, the Biden administration began sending hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority, even though they used that money to fund terrorists who kill Israelis and kill Americans. And the Palestinian consulate that they want to open, listen, I think the Biden administration, if they could, would love to shutter the embassy in Jerusalem. I think they realize they can't do that would be too high of a political price. So if they can't lower the recognition of Israel in Jerusalem, what they want to do is they want to elevate the Palestinian claims to Jerusalem and undermine Israel's claims of sovereignty. I think that is contrary to U.S. law. It is terrible policy. And, you know, I was elected to the Senate 9 years ago. When I arrived in the Senate, I resolved to be the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate, and I've worked every single day since then to do exactly that.
Senator Cruz, I don't think anyone could disagree with that. And I just want to mention, you spoke earlier about the Iranian threat. Just today, we saw an announcement from Iran themselves that they have doubled their uranium enrichment activity. What's your assessment of what's going on with Iran and the Biden administration constantly entreating the Iranians to return to the JCPOA 2015 nuclear deal?
You know, it is incredibly dangerous. I think the greatest national security threat we face today is the threat of a nuclear Iran. And one of the things Joe Biden doesn't understand is that weakness is provocative, that appeasement doesn't work. You know, I've joked, there's a reason nobody studies at the Neville Chamberlain School of Foreign Affairs. Appeasement produces military conflict, produces tension and ultimately suffering and death. And when it comes to Iran, the Ayatollah is laughing at President Biden, the weakness from this president, because they're coming hat in hand wanting to give any deal. And I'll tell you one thing that was incredibly harmful for the safety and security of Israel was when Biden surrendered and abandoned Afghanistan, incompetently abandoned it to the Taliban. That weakness, every enemy of America and every enemy of Israel saw that, and they were emboldened. The Ayatollah was taking a measure of the man in the Oval Office. And unfortunately, I think two things became much, much more likely as a result of Biden's disastrous failure in Afghanistan. Number one, the chances of a Chinese amphibious assault on Taiwan, I think, have risen tenfold. But number two, I think the chances that the Ayatollah develops a nuclear weapon before the end of 2024, tragically, have risen dramatically. And I will say, if Iran gets close to that, I hope and pray that our friends in Israel will act to prevent it from happening, because I don't have any confidence that the Democratic president we have in the United States will do what needs to be done to keep America safe and to keep Israel safe.
Senator Cruz, those are some tough words, and I think the Israelis certainly appreciate that they have at least you in Congress who supports them taking whatever steps they need to take to protect the Jewish state and to protect her citizens. Senator Cruz, I know the RJC is waiting for you right now. Thank you so much for joining me on Global Perspectives on JNS.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.